Thousand Me's up there on the screen. Say hi to Kylie. Hi, Kylie. There. Oh, that was booming. That was better than yesterday. You get a shout out yesterday, Haley. Justice that was the Chief Justice for Brown v. Board, Earl Warren. That's you should know Thurgood Marshall. The Warren Court is, oh Lord. Kylie gets me looming into the camera here. There he is. How do I go as him for Halloween? I think I just came up with my Halloween costume. It just looks like hair gel and a rather vacant expression. Did I tell you my other one? I want to go as Iron Man, but I'm just literally going to carry an iron. World's cheapest costume. Okay, so all deliberate speed. That language kills it, because if I said do your key terms with all deliberate speed, when would I get them? Never, right? I'd never get them. All deliberate speed is no wonder it's not clicking. All deliberate speed is kind of a death knell for this case in many ways. It just allows states to kind of avoid implementation. All right, Kylie. There he is again. I don't know, again, I told you my computer's acting all kinds of glitchy. I think what I'm going to do is just maybe not go full screen. We're going to try that. There's Mr. Earl Warren. All right. What I want to indicate to you guys is look at the percent after Brown v. Board in terms of if I were in 1964, if I went into the South and I looked at what percent of the schools were actually desegregated and which ones were integrated, I would find only 1% of the schools are integrated. In the case of, it's in D.C., it is not Henrico County, I will come up with it in a second. There is a county that just basically elects to shut down the public school system. No more public school. You're going to have to find your education. Rather than, I would prefer to shut down the public school system as opposed to go ahead and have to desegregate. And you have to kind of find education privately at that point. What Brown v. Board is going to take is the civil rights movement. It's going to have to take, civil rights acts, and it's going to have to take years of struggle to actually kind of fully implement. So, unfortunately, Brown v. Board is probably my best example of how the federal government has expanded power, but I have to take a little wind out of my sails because of the all deliberate speed line. It's a tool still. I can still go into the states and say, you have to desegregate. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. So I should be able to go into the states and regulate their activities regarding equity issues. Again, notice how I'm doing these concluding statements. That I've got this idea of expansive once again. I've got kind of what within the clause in the case is giving them expanded powers. In this case, the expanded powers to look at equity issues. But really what I'm going to have to do, and you're going to see this, I'm going to have an activity where I'm going to have you guys kind of look for how does the federal government get states to do things. And it's in part the act. But usually there is a governmental official and an agency that can also monitor. Like with the Clean Air Act, there's the EPA. And there is the ability with that agency to monitor state activities. If you guys were being monitored, does that change how you kind of, act and perform? If there were cameras on you at all time? Putting a public spotlight on states by monitoring, whether it's by the Attorney General or an agency or department, putting that public spotlight on them gets them to often conform. And if they don't, I have the ability, using the Attorney General or the agency, to bring a suit. By a suit, I mean sue, bring you into court, make you face either civil, or if there was something egregious where it was criminal, you could arguably. Someone is, deliberately polluting and has done it knowingly, willfully, and I can trace it to some person within management, and death has resulted. You might have something kind of criminal there. again, also to get this happening, I need more than just the case. I need, spending. I need the carrot and stick. I need grants and aid. I need coercive federalism, if you want to look at it that way. I need all those things for the 14th Amendment really to kind of work. Okay, so with that, we're going to kind of change gears. And what we're looking at next is, again, how has federal government how has federal power expanded? We looked at how the courts were responsible by looking at 4 clauses and 4 cases. Now we're going to look at how the executive and legislative branch, through governmental action, has changed the meaning of the Constitution and expanded the power of the federal government. And these changes are, often you find a kind of a profound enough change in how the federal government is acting that they give it a name. Layer cake, marble cake, creative, cooperative, or cooperative is marble cake. New federalism, new federalism. They start running out of words and cakes. They have names. And again, I try to use the analogy of think of like musical time periods, where you go from blues and jazz to rock, and you go from rock to punk, and you go from punk to, grunge, disco, and what, then there's auto-tune. I don't know what that is. That's odd. But you have these kind of musical periods. And if you can get that, you can get how federalism has a genre, really. Okay? That's what we're going to look at next. So I got to click kind of funny. Cake. Delicious, isn't it? It's terrible. I'm going to have all these pictures and none to give you. Again, political scientists need a reason for a job and for money, so they come up with names, and they come up with multiple names. The first type of federalism we're going to look at is called both dual and layer cake. And the layer cake is hopefully somewhat of a helpful analogy, in that I have local, state, and federal. It took me a while to find that kind of 3-colored cake. And the frosting, the delicious frosting, keeps them separate. They are parallel institutions. And what we're going to see is that this kind of separation is deliberately maintained all the way up to like the 1930s, all the way up to the New Deal. The federal government, what I have for you is examples of where the federal government could have taken power, but elected not to. So that's really what we're going to see here. It starts with Dred Scott versus Sanford. Let me go away real quick. Do you remember? I said away. Do you remember Dred Scott? In that case, who is Dred Scott? What is he suing for? You remember about Dred Scott, guy?
He wants to be free because he was taken to a free state.
Yeah. So this is a case where an African American Dred Scott is suing for his freedom, based on the idea that he was there was an army surgeon that was his owner, and because of his job in the army, has taken him to multiple states, and he's gone from Missouri to Illinois. He's traveled from slave to free state, and he's using that as the basis to kind of sue for freedom. The case itself is distasteful. It's one of the worst kind of verdicts in U.S. history. And Taney, the Chief Justice, is, you ought to say his name as if it's ash in your mouth. It's just blah, spit his name out. Because what he rules is kind of doubly damaging. The first thing he says is this, no, you're not a free citizen. You don't have, not only do you not have that right, you don't have the right to sue. You don't have a right to have standing in this court, because he looks at the Constitution and he looks at the framers' intent, and he says, according to the Constitution and the framers' intent, African Americans were never intended to be citizens, and therefore they don't have citizenship rights, and therefore they don't have the right to sue. If that was all the damage he did, that was one thing. But then he also, in the ruling, undoes the Missouri Compromise, which at least gives you an area where there are free states. Again, the Missouri Compromise sets up a line of latitude. And it says anything above that line of latitude is free states, what you see in blue, and anything below that line of latitude are slave states. And then we have some areas that we'll have to worry about later on. What he says is that is, by definition, unconstitutional, because what you are doing is violating people's right to property. You are taking property without compensating. You're violating, the idea of eminent domain. And this is not an authority you have over the state. So there's Dred Scott tanning, and again, just spit his name out. Awful, awful ruling. What you see here again is the opportunity for the federal government to take power, to say, yes, you are a citizen, and you have a right to sue, and if you go into free territory, that qualifies you. And they didn't take that opportunity. Instead, they took, not only did they not take that opportunity, they rolled back their own power to declare unorganized territory, that is in the northern section of the country, as free states. Okay? So there's one example. There's another case that, again, think of the time period we're in, it deals with slavery again, or in this case, segregation. Plessy versus Ferguson. Who is Plessy? What did he try to do, and what is he being on trial for? Here he is right here. He's on a train. What section is he in? He's in the white section, but he is actually African American. Wait, what? He's 1/8. He's 1/8 African American, but that is the level of prejudice at this point. There's nothing. There may be some. When I was looking for images for him, this is the one that most often cropped up, and I'm having a hard time completely authenticating it. I found it in a lot of reliable sources, but I saw a couple of sites saying we think this is he. I'm pretty confident it is, and he does not look African American, and this is how deep the prejudice lies. That it's not. It's just the fact that he's got 1/8, blood that is African American, and that was enough. That made him somebody that you could charge in this case. This is a deliberate test case, by the way. Plessy was deliberately challenging the law and backed by civil rights kind of organizations. Because here's the idea. If you use this law against someone who looks like this, then there has to be no sense to the law. So this is a deliberate challenge. What we're challenging is the idea that separate is, in fact, a violation, this Separate Accommodations Act for different seats within a railway, but it could open up to the whole idea of white counters and black counters and white restrooms and black restrooms. That this violates the Equal Protection Clause, but what they rule is separate but equal. And a lot of times when you look at the language, this is where students understandably struggle, because you picture the court as seeking out justice, and justice is a truth, it's a beacon. Truth is truth is truth. But truth is relative to who the court is. So when they look at the 13th Amendment, they do all of this kind of legal dancing that says that essentially the 13th Amendment is basically saying that we can't discriminate in terms of political and legal standards. And all the Separate Car Act does is come up with a legal distinction. All this act is saying is you're white, you're black. And white people go there, and white people go there, and black people go there. That's all it's saying. It's a legal distinction. It's just you're tall, you're short. That's all it's saying. It's a legal distinction. And just because I say you're different racially doesn't mean I'm discriminating against you.
Was all this supposed to be in this package?
No, in fact, that was the one I was holding hostage. Now that I think of it, you guys have turned in the key terms. Thank you for a reminder. Kylie's getting quite a show here with all these technical kind of glitches on my part. Thank you for reminding me. You guys gave me the terms, and now I give you the notes where you could have found those terms. And saved yourself a lot of work. Thanks, Mr. Hastings. You thought you were done. Okay, so again, I love this line here where the 14th Amendment was never designed to enforce social as distinguished from political equality. Distinctions exist by definition, and who are we to take any stand, with respect to that? That distinctions are distinctions, and we can make people equal under the law, but we can't make them socially equal. If one group is inferior to another, that's kind of human nature. That's literally the Constitution cannot put them on the same plane. That's their logic at this point. All right? So again, there's an opportunity to do something, and they don't take that opportunity. You leave the issue of segregation to the states. You say their decision to kind of segregate or non-segregate it is part of their reserved powers. Again, this is tricky because you're having to say, here is an opportunity to take power, and they didn't. And we're going to see that economically as well. So what we see here economically, hopefully, is a little familiar to you. You know, with the Civil War and after the Civil War, we're in that second industrial revolution, and businesses are growing in scale and scope, and they're beginning to have more and more power. And the federal government has to make a decision about, do we regulate? Is there an imbalance of power, and do we regulate? And what you see in these cases is essentially where they have the opportunity to regulate, but they walk away from it. So the Interstate Commerce Act is where they have an agency that is set up to regulate railroads. Think of railroads at this point as being the hub, the absolute kind of necessary linchpin that commerce is dependent on. This is our mode of transportation. This is how we get goods around the country. For one group to have a monopoly on the railroad industry is pretty scary, because this is the kind of the lifeline of our economy. Today would be the internet. Picture somebody having outsized control with respect to the internet. So we come up with a regulatory commission to make sure that that lifeline for our economy is being run above board. You see things, for example, about charging different price structures. You're a short haul, small company. I'm going to charge you more than the long haul, big company. There's all kinds of examples of charging unfair rates, and there's examples of collusion where companies are merging, and that's pretty scary for people. But what they do is they don't really regulate. There are a handful of rulings that they do, 16, and 15 of those 16 are overturned. And in terms of like I said, worrying about that collusion, where companies begin to merge and form monopolies or trusts. Remember what the difference between a monopoly and a trust is? If I have a monopoly, I have the exclusive right to manufacture, sell, and distribute a single good. I control the marketplace for a good. What's a trust? Let's say I have a monopoly on autos. What's a trust, Pip?
Like an agreement between two competing companies.
Yeah, and it can be even larger beyond that. So let's say I'm automobiles, I'm cars, and it's the board of directors for that company that you're talking about, mine, are interlocked, but you're not autos. What could you be that makes it even scarier? You're not cars. Gas, rubber, tire industry. It's all the related, the asphalt industry. There's an aggregate company out there somewhere that makes the asphalt. All the related industries that kind of circle around, transportation are colluding through their board of directors. And so I can go after that if I think you're colluding. I can send people to jail. I can make you pay penalties. I can break them apart. The problem is we don't use it. What's Teddy Roosevelt's nickname when it comes to monopolies and trusts? The trust buster. He's going to come in with his big stick. No mollycoddling here. Bring that back. Can we bring back mollycoddling? That's a way of saying that you're pampering somebody. You're kind of babying them. And he's not going to baby these companies and these people. He's going to take his big stick, his foreign policy approach, and hit you over the head with it. In reality, this is more true of Teddy Roosevelt, that there were good trusts and there were bad trusts. The one that really gives him pause is Northern Securities, because it's a potential merger between three of the largest railroads out there. And that's when he breaks up, because he's all about the square deal. He's all about balance, and he'll break that one up. But he also goes after the coal strikers, because that's threatening our energy industry, and that's an imbalance. So I think he often gets this reputation of a trust buster. We're breaking up trust left and right. No, it's really one landmark trust that he breaks up, and otherwise he's trying to maintain balance within the marketplace. Okay, so I'm going to do just a little bit more, and I'm right where I need to be. That is layer cake or dual federalism. What you have is a series of examples where you could have taken power, to tell the states what to do with respect to slavery, or tell the states what to do with respect to segregation, or tell the states and companies what to do with regards to trading practices, and in each case, they don't grab the opportunity. Here they will. Here we're in the 1930s. And the reason the federal government takes more power is because it has to. We're going to be in the middle of the 1930s of the Great Depression and World War II. And, you know, with dual federalism, it was a long kind of sweep of time. And, you know, I talked a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt, and there's other presidents that are there during this time period. With cooperative and then creative and then the others, there's usually a president. In this case, it's FDR. You want to associate cooperative or marble cake with FDR. And the analogy, which is more delicious cake, is what we see as no longer kind of separate autonomous levels of government. We have a major common problem, so we're going to take a common approach to it. The federal government may be the one kind of directing things in terms of funds and coming up with the programs, but we're working cooperatively. In this case, the chocolate and the vanilla cake are inexorably intertwined. You can't separate the two. We're this inseparable mix working towards a common goal. This is where some of your key term work came in. What it looks like, what cooperative or marble cake looks like, is the New Deal, which is the domestic program. I always try to get people to define it this way. It's doing really three things: relief, recovery, and reform. They may seem like, I don't know, terms that that kind of, you know, run together. But relief means we got to stop the bleeding. We've got a quarter of the population out of work. We've got people that are living in shanty towns, Hoovervilles. We've got companies that are collapsing. We need to fix this. We need to stop the bleeding. Excuse me. Then what we need to do is get back on our feet and begin to kind of move past just helping people through the day and getting them back on their feet and beginning to return the economy to normal. And then we want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's what the reform is for. We're going to make sure the banks are doing what they should, and the stock market is, and investors are doing what they should. Okay? Most of the New Deal kind of takes place, well, not most of it, but much of it takes place in a flurry in the first 100 days. And what you see is unprecedented. You see the president, for the first time, acting like a legislative leader, pushing all of these programs. They're called the alphabet soup programs, or an alphabetocracy. And hopefully you remembered a bunch of them. The thing that I want to, talk about real quickly here is, and I saved the hardest thing for last, is the kind of the economics to it. And I'll just give you an overview, and then we'll come back to it. Here's the idea. Our economy is, we've spiraled into a depression. People are out of work. They don't have any money. If they don't have any money, they're not spending anything. If they're not spending anything, businesses can't grow. If businesses can't grow, we can't get people out of unemployment. The federal government is also having to take care of, although we don't have so many of these programs yet, but you'll see ultimately too in one of these situations where the government is taking in less, it's also having to pay out more. So this is a dangerous spiral, isn't it? How do we get out of it? Well, John Maynard Keynes is a foremost economist that kind of is the architect of FDR's New Deal approach, the economics behind the New Deal approach. And what he says essentially is deficit spending is okay. You essentially need to look at the economy as a pump that needs to be primed. We need to put some, we need to kind of flood it and get that pump, working again. And we're going to do it with governmental cash, because that will get things going again. What we're looking at is the idea of, we begin to spend, and as we begin to spend to make up for private sector spending, companies can grow, they can hire. As they hire, people begin to, have money to spend, and the pump is primed that way. It's also called demand-side economics, or sales law. The idea is demand drives supply. A company isn't going to produce anything if they don't think consumers are going to buy it. When we get to Reagan, we kind of flip it on its head, because that's going to be called supply-side economics. And the logic is kind of from the complete other end of the equation. If you are in a economic depression or recession and no one's buying and we're in that economic spiral, what the federal government needs to do is come in and cut the cost of doing business. We need to have less regulation, less taxes on corporations, make it easier for them to conduct business, and we'll get the pump going from that side. They'll be able to hire, they'll be able to put wages in people's pockets, and our economy is dependent on a constant cycle of consumption. And the question is, which way do you want to get the consumption going? Make it easier for businesses to produce and get things going, and cheaper and get it going from that end, or the other way, kind of help people through tax policy and through public spending get things going. And there's a whole other way we can look at inflation as well, because inflation is this separate problem where there is the value of money is dropping relative to the cost of goods. And how do I bring the value of money up? It's mostly through your monetary policy. There are things we can do to make money scarce, and that will drive up the value of money and therefore help us combat inflation. So, at any rate, this idea of having public spending to make up for private spending is what you see in all of these New Deal policies that I'm not going to go over. You guys are going to work on in terms of what was supposed to get things going. And there's wartime efforts that are also impacting the private sector. And then I'll talk about the court packing, but I'll do that later. Okay, we're going to stop. I've caught up to where I want to. Oops. We'll say goodbye to Kylie. Bye, Kylie.